Today's lesson is The Legend of Savitri and Satyavan. Hi, everybody. My name is Roger.
And my name is Helen.
And today we're going to continue talking about this ancient story from India, from Hinduism, and it's called The Legend of Savitri and Satyavan. Now, remember, Savitri is a princess. Lots of suitors, of course, wanted her hand in marriage, but they were not her equal. So she wanted to find a worthy partner. She mounted her chariot and traveled across the land. Eventually, she found a young man chopping wood in the jungle, and she fell for him. But then later on, there was a prophecy that he would die in a year, and that's where we left off last time.
And Savitri, upon hearing this, was very shocked and her heart stopped because she had just found her true love. And she asked herself, would they really be separated so soon? So now we're going to find out what happens later, what Savitri does to try to stay with her beloved, defying all the odds and defying fate itself.
Let's find out about her devotion to her newfound love. Let's listen to the first part of our lesson for today, and then we'll come back to discuss it.
Unwilling to accept this tragic news, the princess swore before the sun god himself that she would never marry another man. Her life, she insisted, was forever entwined with Satyavan's. But after a year of marriage, the fated day arrived, and Satyavan collapsed in her arms. Through her tears, Savitri could just make out Yamaraj, the god of death, who had come to accompany Satyavan to the afterlife.
大家好，第一部分我们可以看到单字 tragic， 它是形容词，指的是悲惨的、不幸的或是悲剧性的。例如 Many people attended Henry's funeral after the tragic road accident. 在那起悲惨的道路事故后，许多人参加了 Henry 的丧礼。另外补充这个字的名词 tragedy, T-R-A-G-E-D-Y, tragedy, 意思是悲剧或是惨案。像是 The tsunami of 2004 was a tragedy for the people of Southeast Asia. 2004年的海啸对东南亚人民来说是场悲剧。或是I saw on the news that there was a tragedy at the shoe factory. 我看到新闻说那家鞋子工厂发生了一起悲剧。接下来我们看到单字 entwine， 它是动词，意思是使紧密相连、纠缠或是使缠绕。举例来说 The incident entwines the fates of the film's two main characters. 这起事件让电影里的两名主角命运交缠。又或者说Billy and Rose's lives entwined when they met at a party 5 years ago. Billy 和 Rose 5年前在一场派对中相识后，命运就紧密结合在一起了。再来，我们看到动词 collapse， 指的是突然倒下、昏倒、崩塌或是瓦解。例如 My neighbor collapsed on the street and had to be taken to the hospital. 我的邻居突然昏倒在街上，必须送医。或是 The bridge collapsed.But luckily, nobody was on it at the time. 这座桥倒塌了，但幸运的是，当时没人在桥上。接着我们看到片语 make out， 意思是勉强的辨认出或是看出。举例来说 It was very foggy at the beach, so it was difficult to make out the boats on the water. 当时海边起浓雾，所以很难看清楚海上的船只。又或者是I was so far away that I couldn't make out how many people were on the road. 我离得太远，所以看不出来有几个人在路上。再来，我们看到单字 accompany， 它是动词，指的是陪伴、陪同或是伴随。例如 Ted accompanied his supervisor on the business trip. Ted 陪同主管出差去了。再举一个例子 Judith accompanied her gown with expensive designer jewelry.Judith 用昂贵的设计师珠宝搭配她的礼服。
So Savitri has found out that her beloved Satyavan is going to die in 1 year. unwilling to accept this tragic news, the princess swore before the sun god himself that she would never marry another man. So when she heard this news, which here is called tragic, now something that is tragic causes great sadness, and it's usually used to refer to someone's death or someone's extreme suffering. So when she heard this tragic news, she refused to accept it. And she swore before the sun god after whom she was named, that she would never marry another man. In other words, if Satyavan were to die, Satyavan would be her last love, and she would never give her heart to anybody else. She would never marry anybody else in her life.
Indeed, so she did receive this tragic prophecy, this tragic news, but she swore, hey, I will not marry another man. You can take him away from me, but I will remain single for the rest of my life. And her life, she insisted, was forever entwined with Satyavan. So they were like soulmates. They were meant to be together. It was their destiny to be together. And we're saying that her life was forever entwined with Satyavan's. So if something's entwined, it twists around something else, and then that other thing twists around you as well. So yes, indeed, they are entangled in each other's arms. They cannot be separated. They are true lovers.
That's right. So they are destined to stay together forever. Now, after a year of marriage, the fated day arrived and Satyavan collapsed in her arms. So here we're talking about a fated day. Something that is fated is definitely going to happen because of fate. So you can talk about a fated tragedy as well. That means this tragedy was bound to happen. It's definitely going to happen because it was decided by fate. So it was decided by fate that that day Satyavan was going to die. And indeed, Satyavan collapsed in her arms. When you collapse, you fall down suddenly because you're ill or because you're tired. In this case, Satyavan fell down. He collapsed in her arms, so she caught him when he fell down because it was the fated day that he was going to die.
And we're describing this as the fated day. You could also say this was the fateful day, when fate was to be fulfilled, when prophecy was to be fulfilled. And indeed, it looks like it came true. Satyavan collapsed in her arms. And of course, she was very sad about that. And through her tears, Savitri could just make out Yamraj, who is the god of death, and he had come to accompany Satyavan to the afterlife. So she was crying, oh my dear Satyavan, you've died. What am I going to do? But through her tears, she may have looked up and noticed something. She could make out Yamraj. Here we've got make out, and that just means that you kind of see something. It's not clear at first, and you're not quite sure what you're looking at, but then later you can see some familiar features, so you can make something out. If you look at clouds, for example, that cloud looks like something. I can sort of make out the image of a turtle in that cloud or something like that. So in this particular case, she could tell that it was Yamraj, who is the god of death, and of course, when someone dies, the god of death is going to come to take you to the afterlife. And here we've got the verb to accompany, which means to just basically go with somebody or to escort somebody.
That's right. So if you're going to see a doctor, you might want someone to accompany you, like a friend or a family member, so that that person can take you back home if you're feeling sick. And a word about the phrasal verb make out. You can also use this phrasal verb when you're talking about things that you're listening to. So if you don't understand what you're hearing or listening to, you can also say, I can't make out what that person is saying. Or you can also use make out to say something about what you're trying to understand. I can't make out what that person is saying because that person is speaking a different dialect. So those are different ways of using the phrasal verb make out.
Right, so she could tell it was Yamraj, the god of death, and of course the god of death had come to accompany Satyavan to the afterlife. And of course the afterlife is the next life after this one, depending on where you're going, and it kind of depends on your religious beliefs, of course. The afterlife for Christians would be either to go to heaven or hell, but in Buddhism, maybe your afterlife means reincarnating into another life form or something. There are various interpretations of what the afterlife is, but basically it's the life after death. Okay, that brings us to the end of the first part of our lesson for today. Let's move on now to the second part and continue to learn about Savitri's devotion.
Savitri was determined not to leave Satyavan's side, so she followed Yamaraj until her feet bled. Impressed by her persistence, Yamaraj offered to grant her one wish, anything but her husband's life. Savitri requested that her father-in-law's sight be returned. Her wish was granted, but Savitri refused to depart. Upon being offered a second wish, she asked for her husband's kingdom to be restored. Again, Yamaraj agreed and continued on his way, but still Savitri refused to leave.
最后第二部分我们看到动词 grant， 它的意思是给予、授予或是准许。我们可以说 The scholarships were granted to exceptional graduates. 这些奖学金授予杰出毕业生。也可以说 The star granted a rare interview with a magazine reporter. 那位明星准许一位杂志记者做难得的访问。
So Savitri was determined not to leave Satyavan's side, so she followed Yamaraj until her feet bled. So as we can recall, Yamaraj came to bring Satyavan to the afterlife, to the place where dead people go. And Savitri was determined not to leave Satyavan's side. That means she was not going to leave him. Doesn't mean that she has to stand next to him by his side, but she was not going to leave him alone, allow him to be taken away. So she followed Yamaraj until her feet bled. She walked a long time. So because she walked long distances and because the ground was probably very rough and very hard, her feet started bleeding.
Exactly. And to bleed is when blood comes out of your body due to injury or something like that. And bled is the past tense. So that's pretty painful there to have your feet bleeding. And impressed by her persistence, Yamaraj offered to grant her one wish, anything but her husband's life. So here's the god of death saying, pretty impressive, you know. You've got that persistence. You're very devoted. So I'm recognizing that as being something really special. So I'm going to let you have one wish. I'm going to grant you a wish because of your persistence. Persistence just refers to when you don't give up and when you just won't take no for an answer. The adjective is to be persistent. If you want a job, for example, you want to be persistent and keep trying over and over until they accept you. And if you grant someone something, you give that thing to them because you have the power to do so.
Yes, and Yamaraj offered to grant her, to give her something that she wants, and that would be one wish. But she can wish for anything but her husband's life. In other words, she can ask for anything she wants in the world, but she cannot ask for her husband to come back to life.
Right, so she could make a wish for anything except for her husband's life. That's the exception. You can wish for anything you want, all the gold in the world. You can wish for eternal life or something like that, or a great palace, but you cannot wish for your husband to continue living after today. That's just forbidden. You can't do that. And, well, Savitri was kind of clever here. She requested that her father-in-law's sight be returned. So that, of course, is very nice. Remember, Savitri and Satyavan were married. They were together, so that means the king, the blind king, is now her father-in-law, or at least was. Now, Satyavan has passed away, but still, she wanted to do him a favor, so she requested that her father-in-law's sight be returned. His sense of sight could return to normal, and he would be able to see the world again.
And her wish was granted. In other words, Yamaraj gave her this wish, but Savitri refused to depart. She refused to leave, to go away, because Yamaraj had offered her this wish so that she would be happy and go back home. At least that's what he had hoped. But after her wish was granted, she still continued following Yamraj and Satyavan.
Okay, so again, she was persistent, and of course, the god of death there was quite impressed with her devotion and with her persistence. So she was granted another wish. She was offered a second wish. And when she was granted that wish, she asked for her husband's kingdom to be restored. Okay, so that means they could become royalty once again. And again, Yamraj agreed and continued on his way, but still, Savitri refused to leave. So her dead husband's father's kingdom has been restored, and the king's eyesight has been restored, but still Savitri was not satisfied. She continued to follow the god of death because she was still not going to give up. She was not going to take no for an answer. Let's find out what happens next in the final part of our lesson. Let's listen.
Frustrated, Yamraj offered Savitri one final wish. After thinking carefully, she wished to be the mother of many children. Yamraj nodded, but when he tried to dismiss her, she asked how she could bear children without a husband. The god considered her clever question and knew he'd been bested. With Yamraj's blessing, the lovers walked back to the land of the living, free to enjoy their lifetime together.
So by now, Yamraj is becoming really annoyed by Savitri, who wouldn't stop following them. She kept on walking and following Yamraj, who was accompanying Satyavan to the afterlife. Frustrated, Yamraj offered Savitri one final wish. Yamraj at this point felt frustrated. He was annoyed and impatient with her because she just wouldn't go away. So he said to her, "Okay, you can have one final wish."
Exactly. Now, remember, of course, she cannot wish for her husband's life to be restored. So she was quite clever here. She wished that she could be the mother of many children, which seems a simple enough request. So Yamraj nodded, but when he tried to dismiss her, she asked how she could bear children without a husband. Good point. And of course, if you dismiss someone, you just let them go. You say you're dismissed, you can leave. You don't need to stay here anymore. So he tried to send her on her way. He tried to get rid of her, basically. Stop pestering me. Would you get out of here and stop bothering me? But of course, she would not take no for an answer, so she had a question to Yamraj. Well, you know, if I'm going to be the mother of many children, how can I do that if I don't have a husband? Good point.
Right, to bear children means to give birth to children. And the god considered Savitri's clever question and knew he'd been bested. So to best means to gain an advantage over an opponent, over somebody else, or to defeat somebody else. And he realized that Savitri had defeated him in this game, in this attempt to bring Satyavan back to life. So with Yamraj's blessing, the lovers walked back to the land of the living, free to enjoy their lifetime together.
Interesting. That's an interesting twist to this story. They must have had different rules back then regarding marriage. Of course, nowadays, if a woman loses her husband and she becomes a widow, she's perfectly free to find somebody else to marry. And maybe that's what Yamraj could have said. He could have told her, well, your husband's dead, but you can still go off and find somebody else. There are still plenty of fish in the ocean. But I guess things did not work that way. I guess if your husband dies, you can't seek another husband. We must assume that. So because of these conditions here, Yamraj knew he had been beaten. He had been bested. And so he finally came to his senses and said, okay, you can have your dead husband back. And so they had Yamraj's blessing. Your blessing, of course, is best wishes given to someone, especially if you're a god or a deity or something really powerful like that.
Right. So here we have a happy ending with Savitri and Satyavan living happily ever after. And we assume also that they will have a lot of children because that was the last wish that Savitri had asked Yamraj.
Pretty cool. And to boot there, the extra bonus there was that the new married couple wouldn't have to live in the jungle cutting wood for a living. The kingdom had been restored, and now she can live in a palace like she's been used to. Okay, that brings us to the end of our discussion for today. Here comes our Chinese teacher, Hanny.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第二部分有一个句子写到 Savitri requested that her father-in-law's sight be returned。 我们看到主要子句里面的动词 requested 它是过去式，可是看到后方的 that 子句里面这个主词 her father-in-law's sight 后面却是搭配 be 动词的原形动词，这可没有写错哦。那我们来学习它相关的用法。英文里面呢，有一些动词的后面是可以接 that 主词 should 原形动词，或者是接 that 主词加原形动词。好，那我们说的这些动词呢，大致上可以分成4种类型。第一大类型是表达要求、请求，像 ask、demand、require、request 等等。那么第二个类型是表达建议、提议，像 suggest、propose、advise、recommend 等等。那么第三个类型是表达坚持、坚决要求，像是 insist。还有第4个类型是表达命令、指示，像是 order 或者是 command 等等。那我们来看2个例句哦。He demanded that I apologize to him。他要求我向他道歉。He demanded 这边我们听到是过去式，但是我们 that 子句里面是 that I apologized to him， 动词的部分就用原形动词 apologize。 好，再看个例句 They suggested that we visit the art museum。 他们建议我们去造访美术馆。好，那另外要提醒同学们，我们在使用 insist 的时候呢，它如果用来表达坚持、坚持要求、坚决认为，那这时候才适用到我们前面介绍的那样句型。举例来说 Her parents insisted that she go see a doctor immediately。 她爸妈坚决要求她马上去看医生。可是当我们这个动词 insist 是用来表达坚称、坚持说怎么样怎么样，坚持做怎么样怎么样，这时候它的用法你可以用 insist on 加上名词或动名词，或者是用 insist 加上 that 子句。可是这个 that 子句里面的动词就是随着句子的时态而定。好，例如 Bob insisted that he didn't take the money。 Bob 坚称他没有拿走那笔钱。好，再来我们看到同样在课文第2部分有一个句子写到说 Upon being offered a second wish，She asked for her husband's kingdom to be restored。 句子里面呢，它用到 upon 加上动词 ing。 好，那当我们使用介系词 upon 或者是 on 去加名词或动名词，就可以表达一怎么样就怎么样，也就是 immediately after 点点点的那种意思。那在使用的时候 upon 或是 on 去加名词或动名词，这部分它可以摆在主要子句之前或是之后。举例来说 She burst into tears on hearing the news。 她一听到消息就哭了起来。 He fainted upon seeing blood。 他一看到血就昏过去了。好，那以上是今天重点整理，我们回顾今天单字吧。
Tragic. The movie is a tragic story about young soldiers who get killed in a meaningless war. Collapse. The old man collapsed while walking his dog and was taken to the hospital in an ambulance. Accompany. 2 teachers accompanied the students on their field trip to the zoo. Grant. The board of directors granted the manager a chance to respond to the negative performance reviews. Depart. The bus was scheduled to depart at 8:45, but was delayed by a flat tire. Frustrated. The child became frustrated from losing the game and knocked the game pieces to the floor. Dismiss. The witness was dismissed after telling the police everything she saw that night. Blessing. Though she wasn't sure if it would work, the boss gave her blessing to the team's new advertising strategy.
Discussion Starter starts now!
Here is our discussion starter for today, and the question is, if someone knew that you would die in 1 year, would you want them to tell you? Why or why not?
That's a really tough question, but I think I would want them to tell me since that would allow me to organize my affairs, do everything that I wanted to do or needed to do before I died, and also to say my last farewell to my loved ones.
Good point, but for me, I would not want to know that information because basically for a whole year, I would just be worrying about death. I'd be scared of it. I'd keep asking myself, it's going to hurt? How is it going to be? Am I going to go to heaven or hell after I die? I would just be worrying too much about stuff I just rather would not know. Like we say in English, ignorance is bliss.
Well, everyone, today's article has come to an end, and I sure hope you enjoy reading along with us. I am Helen.
I am Roger.
See you next time.